Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this one-hour broadcast is World Watchers. It is program number 807, May the 25th, 1987. Before I begin with the bulk of the program, I just want to mention a letter I received from Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream, headquarters in Oakland, California. Dreyer's was putting on a campaign of a low-calorie ice cream, and they wanted to show several people who allegedly were losers. And as part of their big campaign, they had hired Melvin Dummar, the gentleman who said that he saw Howard Hughes in Utah, which he never had done, and he was a loser in the stake of millions of dollars. And the other person was John Ehrlichman, a Watergate defendant who eventually went to jail, and they were using his face for the promotion of ice cream. Well, as soon as I read that, I was simply furious, really angry. And I called Dreyer's, the office that managed the public relations that allegedly was making this commercial, and indicated that John Ehrlichman did crimes that he never was punished for, how he framed a black man, Elmer Davis, to serve time, already 3 years when I met him, in Folsom Prison for allegedly breaking into the offices of Daniel Ellsberg, psychiatrist, in Beverly Hills. And I explained that Elmer had never been on Bedford Drive and that the Beverly Hills police locked him up in a California prison, a black man taking the penalty for John Ehrlichman and E. Howard Hunt and the White House burglars. And I said that Ehrlichman's face associated with these commercials doesn't make him a loser. He gets the residuals and a big fat check, and that he never, as I say, ever was really punished for the terrible things that they did. Well, following the phone call, I got a letter this week, and I share it with you only to indicate that expressing your feelings doesn't always pay off, but sometimes it does. And when it does, it's rewarding, because I don't think enough people make the energy or effort to express their feelings in these matters. The letter was from W.F. Kronk, president of Dreyer Ice Cream. He wrote, "Dear Ms. Brussell, I sincerely thank you for your call indicating your dissatisfaction with Dreyer's Grand Light television commercial. I understand the depth of your concern and appreciate your taking the time to call. At Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream, we have always been concerned with our customers' feelings towards our product, our advertising, and our company's reputation. We spend considerable time trying to be as personally responsible as possible. Given your thoughts and those of others, we have decided to discontinue immediately the use of John Ehrlichman in our Dreyer's Grand Light advertising campaign. While we received some positive feedback, and in spite of the fact that the introduction of our new product has met with extraordinary success, the intensity of concern over the Ehrlichman segment has caused us to reach this decision. Once again, I thank you for taking time to share your concern with us." I think that was a very nice letter. I'm going to send him a copy of the article I wrote for Playgirl, "Is Howard Hughes Dead and Buried Off a Greek Island?" That was published 2 years before Vance Cooper was cashed in under the name of Howard Hughes, flying already dead from Mexico to Houston, Texas. And I'll also send him my article from The Realist, "Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped?" to show my concern about John Ehrlichman. But again, I bring this up because each person could do a little bit more. I know I do a lot, but I can't do too much. And it is a point that people don't take advantage of the telephone, of the postage stamp. They sit and mumble by themselves most of the time, sometimes with one other person, two if they're lucky, and don't even take a chance to express how they feel about certain things coming all around them. There was an article in, pardon my shuffling those papers. There's an article in Newsday that is very important in terms of the Iran-Contra mentality. Newsday isn't available to very many people. It was reprinted in the San Francisco Chronicle, titled "Report of Gruesome Cover-Up of the CIA in the Nicaraguan War." 2 former Contra leaders have accused the CIA of ordering a gruesome cover-up scheme that Costa Ricans say apparently concealed the Americans' deaths in the Contra rebels' war against Nicaragua. The incident involves the crash 3 years ago of a United States government-owned airplane during a covert mission. In interviews with Newsday, Eden Pastora and his top lieutenant, Carol Prado, said that CIA officials directed them to mutilate the corpses of crash victims. The CIA orders said to remove jaw bones and the teeth of dead men. Pastora and Prado identified the two CIA officials stationed in Costa Rica, including the CIA station chief, who claimed they gave their group the order to mutilate the bodies so they couldn't be identified. These are American soldiers talking about the mutilation of Americans so that the families or people won't know, and it's on Memorial Day, this particular day, and it's very timely. The article says Costa Rican authorities said Pastora's guerrillas were the first to reach the wreckage of the DC-3. It went down March 24, 1984, in the jungle a few miles from the Nicaraguan border. The bodies were taken out of the plane and burned, some of them twice. Physical evidence was removed or destroyed by Costa Rican investigators by the time they arrived, and bodies were removed from the scene by an unidentified helicopter, witnesses said. The statement of Pastora and Prado, combined with new information from Angel Edmundo Solano, Costa Rica's security minister at the time of the crash, represents the strongest indication that there were American deaths in Nicaragua that were covered up by the U.S. government. And, of course, the CIA says no comment. Villagers went to the crash scene. They told the Costa Rica government they saw bodies of men who looked like Americans before the burning took place. One of the few pieces of physical evidence that was overlooked by the guerrillas were fragments of a child's letter and poem written in English. A socialist member of Costa Rica's Congress, Sergio Ardon, notified the authorities of the crash before it became public knowledge, told the Costa Rican press at the time that his Contra sources said at least one American had died. An American freelance journalist in Costa Rica, Martha Honey, and this article in Newsday doesn't identify her as having this immense lawsuit by the Christic Institute. They make it look like she's a journalist apart from those particular Contras that have been indicted in their case. But Martha Honey said that Felipe Vidal, a Cuban-American who led Contra troops, told her in confidence that Americans had died in the crash. Congressional investigators identified Vidal, who would not be reached for comment, as a CIA operative. You know, this gives a different dimension to the attempted murder of Eden Pastora and Martha Honey the night of the bombing at LaPenca in Costa Rica. Maybe because they knew about these deaths, she being a journalist down there, it gives a different reason for the bombing, trying to wipe out these witnesses also to the early death of the Americans in previous actions of the CIA. The article goes on. Prado, Pastora's former aide, said the plane's pilot was a friend of his, Renato Torrealba, a Nicaraguan married to an American. He was CIA's chief pilot at the time. He had sophisticated air navigation system, but it crashed. Prado and Pastora said the CIA officials used pseudonyms in dealing with the Contras. One CIA who directed the cover-up was a South American who used the name Ivan Gomez. Pastora said another official involved was Gomez's boss, CIA Costa Rica station chief, who used the name Thomas Castillo. The World War II vintage DC-3 was painted with Canadian markings. And remember in the Bay of Pigs how we took off the identification of planes coming from Miami, American planes. This one had Canadian markings and a serial number when it crashed. An aviation title company searched Federal Aviation Administration records at Newsday's request. The plane had not had a Canadian owner since 1979, and this was 1974. The title report listed the most recent owner as an Indianapolis man named Robert Branch. Now, Robert Owen, who's been testifying, said that he worked for a Congressman Quayle from Indiana, and he introduced him to a constituent, John Hull, who had the airstrip and the weapons, the drug traffic, assassination plans coming out of his ranch. So Indianapolis has a certain contact in this area, so maybe that should be examined further. The U.S. Assistant Attorney Charles Gudlow, an Assistant U.S. Attorney in Indianapolis, confirmed that the federal government took custody of the plane from Branch from Indianapolis in July 1983, before the craft had allegedly been used in drug deals. So that is just the story today, coming out, removing the jaws and the teeth, and then cremating them once and then cremating them twice, so that Americans at home wouldn't know what is going on. Now, one of the most important segments of this whole Iran-Contra story, of course, is that corporation TCI with its subsidiary IIS that becomes Stanford Technology, then Stanford Technology Trading Group. I'm just going to run through a few articles pertinent to that team because I want to do more on Iraq and the Persian Gulf for most of the broadcast. I'm just going to give you the titles, and I'll go into details later. But Albert Hakim this Wednesday is going to be on the stand, and here are just a few articles about this team out of Stanford Technology this week. The Monterey Herald and, of course, the wire services today said Congress committees want General Secord to return as a witnesses. His testimony is being questioned, and after John Singlam came up and Mr. Calero, they want more from Richard Secord. That will be a high trick, given the secrecy of this corporation and how it was set up, but they know he's lying. Another story from the New York Times, a little item, Secord's companies. The Presidential Records Act obviously does not apply to Richard Secord, retired Air Force officer who testified before the Select Committee. Mr. Secord told of how he controlled a network of 10 foreign secret companies involved with the Iran-Contra affair without ever having a signature appear on a single piece of paper. Secord has a documented connection to 2 American companies, and he's sensitive about press reports of their corporate affiliations. In his testimony, he acknowledged he was half owner of Stanford Technology Trading Group, a company in Northern Virginia, and a former director of Stanford Technology Corporation, a California company, again, the subsidiary of Otto von Bolschwing's TCI. He said the names of the 2 companies were confusing, but he nevertheless expressed some displeasure and how often it's reported in the press incorrectly. Secord's business partner, Albert Hakim, an Iranian-American businessman, added to the confusion when he talked to the investigators in Paris. Hakim, who controls Stanford Technology, is half-owner with Secord in the trading company. They're both 50-50 in both, and there's no difference except adding the word trading company, TC, and Vienna, appropriately called Vienna, Virginia, for their offices. Hakim told investigators of other corporate entities he controlled with similar names: Stanford Technology Corporation S.A. in Panama, Science Technology Trading Group Incorporated, and Stanford Technology Corporation Services S.A. in Switzerland. As he was going through a list of 10 corporations with the committee investigators, Hakim interrupted at one point and said of one company, the name was used to create confusion. There's a long article in Spotlight by Warren Howe, Pivot Man Identified as Agent, and I'll do more with you on that later. The Pivot Man is Albert Hakim, of course, from Stanford Technology, and the importance of this article that I really want to spend a half hour or so on is that Hakim was given a large amount of money in 1977 by the Olin Corporation, O-L-I-N Corporation, a giant Connecticut chemical and weapons conglomerate. Now, the head of the Olin Foundation is William Simon, a Knight of Malta, a member of the AmeriCares funding the Contras, a very important person in the whole structure of our government, former Secretary of the Treasury, board of the Helianetics, board of Western, along with Western Gold, similar to John Singlaub and Edward Teller being on Helianetics with Simon. And the Olin Corporation, that is directly linked to William Simon, gave Albert Hakim, one account I have is $6 million, another is at $1 million, but he allegedly took many millions, which appeared as a swindle and never went to jail. Then Albert Hakim was used by the White House for these other operations, so that in technicality, or trying to prove this fact would be difficult, but was William Simon certainly the backbone of our intelligence operations and also on the board with Reed Irvine of Accuracy in Media? Was he giving this huge sum to Albert Hakim still in Iran? So when the Shah fell, or in the eventuality he did, or even if not, then Hakim comes all the way from Iran to Palo Alto, to Silicon Valley, and just happens to buy the subsidiary that Mr. John Paul Getty and Mr. Senecas from Fairchild Schlumberger and from ITT and the officers of the Defense Department He simply buys this company, and then he's back in business with Theodore Shackley and Thomas Kleins and Edwin Wilson and Frank Turple. A very important article, and as I say, I'll go back to it more. The New York Times May 8th says, quizzing of Secord is seen as a conspiracy case. And I bring that up because very often the subject comes up about what is a conspiracy and what isn't. And on David Emery's program a few weeks ago, the talk show part, there was a discussion about conspiracy theories and conspiracies. I am very proud to be investigating conspiracies, even if other people deny that there are such things as conspiracies. And the New York Times is writing about a conspiracy, and they do, in fact, exist. I don't know why anyone has to hide behind the fact that you investigate conspiracies. The New York Times and LA Times covered a story, also Mossad Syndicate. Secord seeks to bar scrutiny of Swiss bank data. He said on the stand he would share his information of his bank accounts, and now he's backing out. Another article from the Oregon newspaper and the San Jose Mercury, Secord and Hakim tried to buy 10,000 acres up near Seattle. Retired Major General Secord and Los Gatos businessman Albert Hakim, and they were going to buy this territory for at least $5 million, bordering on Indian land, working with another person up in that area. His name is John Miracle, a Seattle attorney who represented these three. Secord said he just has pittance in his bank. He didn't make a profit. And while the Iran-Contra affair was going on, they were shelling up and intended to be part of a $5 million deal of timberland, which adjoins the Quinault Indian Reservation in the state's Olympic Peninsula. Approximately 3,000 acres of the parcel can be harvested. So they do have money to invest, and many corporations, even though the Iran-Contra affair may only go into a few of them. Also, Spotlight has a long article. Secord dates Iran arms deal to 1985, but the record shows the deal started in 1981. I'll get back to all of these in detail, but I just want to say that General Secord was in on that October 80 surprise, whereby the hostage rescue mission was completely blown, where Jimmy Carter didn't get the necessary points and popular approval to win the election against Ronald Reagan. Robert Keith Gray's name is on the papers of the Contragate hearings, the Iran scandal at the time. Edwin Meese is also William Casey. And there's a very good article available soon. I don't know how soon it'll be reprinted, but Barbara Honecker here on the Peninsula has written a brilliant article on the October 80 surprise. And, of course, involved there is Mr. Secord. And so that the money that would flow to the Iranians could be blackmail money. Richard Allen is very much a part of that, and there are good articles on that I haven't even been able to get to. Another story from the San Francisco Examiner, May 24th, Secord denies gouging rebels on arms sales. Now, Secord and Hakim had some control over the purchases because John Singlaub testified last week that he could get weapons for the Contras if the purpose was weapons for these poor bleeding Contra fighters. He could get them at a given price, and yet Oliver North had to transfer the weapon sales to Secord and Hakim, who charged twice the price. And so the question is, if Oliver North is so patriotic, if Robert Owen is so patriotic, if all these donors are so patriotic, what was the necessity to pay twice the price when the money was available from other countries, particularly? Why double the cost? Why did it have to go to Hakim and Secord? The answer to that lies into the riddle of how TCI and IIS became Stanford Technology Trading Group, and the nest of people, the real high military defense, and what they do in this tangled web of espionage. Also, Secord testified about shredding papers. We know about Ollie North's shredding party, and Washington Post had a story May 8th, shredding unrelated to Contra probe. Secord asserts, well, try and prove that one. Now, just a few topic articles that are currently calling my attention. I want to mention them to you. I'll go back to them later. As I say, I want to get to the the Iraq Gulf, Persian Gulf story. Very good article by Mary McGrory in the Washington Post, May 22nd, 1985, titled A Sneer on the Stand. Ollie's yuppie agent, that's Robert Owen, flaunts his double dealing. The committee permitted him to turn the occasion into something between a Contra rally and a meeting of the Oliver North fan club. And I'll do more on that article later. There's an organization called the American People's Right to Know. I hope you have a pencil ready. I'm going to give you some addresses on the program. If I go too fast, send a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I'll have them on the printed bibliography sheet for this evening. It's a group set up by Corliss Lamont, Beth Lamont, and Edith Tiger, Box 42, Cathedral Station, New York, 10025. And they want you to send or write to them. They have listed in the past 3 decades at least 7 covert wars or military aggressions which have been initiated, going to the Vietnam War, the Bay of Pigs, the Marine intervention in the Dominican Republic, the U.S. bombing of Cambodia. They list President Nixon, not Henry Kissinger's idea, the secret war against Nicaragua from 1981 to 87, the U.S. troops' invasion of Grenada, and the bombing of Libya. And you can write to them and get more information. They said this is a violation of presidential policies, and as I say, the address is here. There's no fee to send, but you can write. The Washington Post has a long article this past week. PTL paid $120,000 to Capitol Liaison. This article is May 13th, 1987, and this is the connection of the PTL to George Bush's office. A consultant, Peter B. Teeley, received $120,000 in fees from PTL. In the past 18 months, Teeley served Vice President George Bush's press secretary until 84, and then it goes into more people, 3 people directly linked to George Bush and the PTL. I'll do that later. Again, Time Magazine, May 24th, 1987, has a long segment on the scandals of Ronald Reagan. It also has a block on page 33, Conspiracy Theories. What kind of criminal prosecutions might grow out of the Iran-Contra affair? And again, the word conspiracy is finally being used, and not in a negative, kinky, dumb, casting aspersions on anybody who thinks it. This word, again, comes out in the press, and it's coming out more often. People's Daily World, May 19th, 1987. Memo reveals extent of White House conspiracy. And as I say, when I use that word 4, 5, 10, 12, 17 years ago, even last week, there are people whose hair stands up on end. That's too bad. There is a White House conspiracy. There have been White House conspiracies, Justice Department, CIA, Defense Department, State Department. They are conspiracies. By definition, a conspiracy is 2 or more people doing an illegal act. So I wish people would stop apologizing, those who study these things, that they are looking into conspiracy. Now, Time Magazine, May 25th, has a long article, a cover story on sleaze. I've been talking about Reagan's sleaze for years, mentioned different persons of his that were under investigation. In an hour a week, I can barely cover them. But page 18 says, morality among the supply-siders. More than 100 Reagan administration officials have faced allegations of questionable activities. Some are still in office, others resigned under a cloud. Many of the allegations were relatively minor, but the accumulation of cases produces a portrait of impropriety on a grand scale. Well, I don't think Mr. Admiral Poindexter or Mr. Robert McFarland from the NSC, from the Marines, I think their decisions to go to Libya on the provocateur lie of the Berlin bombing, the invasion of Grenada on the lie that the students were in danger, those are not minor offenses. Those are also conspiracies, but they're talking about the people closest to Ronald Reagan, and I think this leads up to why we're having this great diversionary now, the Gulf, Iran, Iraq situation, because Ronald Reagan has 4 of his very closest friends that are in deep, deep trouble. One is Michael Deaver, one is Raymond Donovan, one is Edwin Meese, certainly he's involved now in the WedTech, and Lynn Nofziger, and those people's careers have been just as close as bread and butter to Ronald Reagan, and hardly anybody can visit him without being tainted with these scandals or having murdered somebody. And of course, Mr. Wick of the USIA is one of his best friends, and he was illegally wiretapping or tapping telephones of people. The only reason these people haven't been prosecuted is the Attorney General is elected by the President, and it's the President's friends that they're talking about. The New York Times has an article May the 11th A full page on one side is a discussion of Ronald Reagan. Aides to the president and the vice president are braced for bombshells. Resignation, in quotes, on the Reagan staff. And then alongside that page, Bush staff says, wait until it happens. And that is a warning there will be bombshells. Of course, a lot of people are going to cover this up much faster and heavier with the cover-up than we can imagine. One of the covers up this week was Canada finds no crimes. They're calling off the Iran arms investigation. 2 Canadians, Ernest Miller and Donald Fraser, were under close scrutiny after William Casey revealed their connection, the Canadians, to threatening a lawsuit to cover $10 million involved in the Iran arms deal loaned by Mr. Khashoggi. And now they say that that was all a fabrication. We're not going to investigate it anymore, even though Mr. Khashoggi talks about why he loaned the $10 million in a long article in Washington Times with Arnaud de Borchgrave. The Washington Watch, a small newsletter, came out May 13, 1987, and it refers to the Department of Defense and that group, the Peregrine, that I talked about that's so important. And April 25th, Philadelphia Inquirer also ran the story of Peregrine International Associates of Dallas and their connections to the Defense Department to commit assassination worldwide, including Central America. And they refer to training Contras and elite commando units in El Salvador, Honduras, and Peru. And this article says, according to U.S. Army Lieutenant General Samuel Wilson, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, as quoted by one of the Peregrine employees, the DIA was picking up 90% of the CIA's work. The DIA was going to become the new CIA and leave the CIA out there to take the public licks. And again, the CIA is the front guy. The National Security Council and the DIA are not touched. On the NSC sits Fritz Kramer and Sven Kramer. Partner with Kramer is Daniel Graham, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and this same Mr. Wilson, Lieutenant General Samuel Wilson, the former head of the DIA, worked for Peregrine and had direct contacts to the desks of the head of the DIA, the current one, and Caspar Weinberger, and he spells it out there, as I said in the Peregrine article before, and should do other broadcasts on it again. If anything comes down, you can always blame Casey, which they're doing, or North, or Owen, or Calero. These are the schleppers, or Secord, or Hakim. But the network stays intact, and as North explained to Robert Owen, who testified, if it all comes down, I'm the fall guy. Guardian has a article by Jack Calhoun, May 13th. Are the select committees preparing a whitewash? Of course they are. They're numbering countries. They're leaving names of the intelligence community out. They're now asking hard questions, but there's still a lot of material coming out, and it will be pouring out for years. There's a story in the San Francisco Chronicle, May 21st. Rebel leaders getting rich, ex-Contra says, and it tells about their apartments, their salaries. They're drawing large amounts of money, and there was another article in the Miami Herald of the fancy living. Going back to that article I did, item 2 weeks in succession, 2 Oklahomans are charged with plot to assassinate Nicaraguan president. I referred to this Neil Livingston, who works with Gray and Company and with the Defense Department, who said Gaddafi should be killed and Ortega should be killed, and Robert Owen working for him, going up to the home of John Singlau with Robert Brown, who sends the mercenaries out to kill, and the Defense Department wanting Ortega dead. These 2 men were in touch with Mr. Crane, Representative Crane from Illinois, who's a member of Western Goals with John Singlau, Western Goals run by Spitz Channel. But one of the 2 men involved with this, Adenell Howard, was ready to pay $5 million for the murder. This article said that Mr. Howard he hasn't been arrested. He's believed to have left the state in search of employment, and he'll get employment. And also one of the 2 men is going to be called the unindicted co-conspirator. So these 2 are free to go off and they could work with another team that might kill Daniel Ortega. They're not being punished, and that's an important thing, that even when the story breaks, the top people are let loose. He not only is looking for another state, he's looking for another country, probably will never be seen again. And then just finally, I want to do, as I say, more in the Gulf, an article from the Miami Herald, May the 10th, secret Contra pact linked to invasion of Falklands. and this has to do with the military junta in Argentina used by the Contras until the Falkland War broke out. I've talked about that before. And the relationship of our country, very cozy and kindly, towards the death squad captains in Argentina that were working in Central America with our Contras, the great freedom fighters. I'll take a 1-minute break now and then continue going into the Iraq situation, the Persian Gulf. This is Mae Brussell, and as I say, we'll take a breather, and I'll update these articles. Just mentioning them doesn't really tell you how much material there is, but we'll get back to it later. This is Mae Brussell. It's part 2 of World Watchers, program number 807. I certainly hope that many of you tape these broadcasts off the air. I just ran through maybe 30 very, very important articles, and just having them here in front of me is mind-boggling. So I know that rattling them off one after the other is and can be very confusing. I don't know the alternative. I can spend 15 or 20 minutes on each article, or let you just get an overview of some of the material that's coming out and hopefully get back to it later. That's a decision I have to make each week, but I don't want you to think I'm missing some of these stories that are coming out, and some I know you're not getting at all in your newspapers, and it's better to just get a glimpse of the overview sometimes because we do have so much material coming out. There is a book called The Chronology, the documented day-by-day account of the secret military assistance to the Iran-Contra affairs. I'm going to get it. I haven't gotten it yet. It's published by Warner Books. It's a paperback, and it might be helpful in understanding some of the players. There was a book by Bernard Fensterwald regarding the Watergate investigation that he called Coincidence or Conspiracy. And even though Fensterwald is an attorney for the Central Intelligence Agency, it's one of the best books written about Watergate because it takes certain characters, not all of them, and gives profiles of them and gives pictures. And when those names reappear later in other articles or books, or at any time, you get a vision of who they are, and it's very helpful to have this directory. Another book that is out is titled, What Do You Know About the Iran-Iraq War? This is 1495. It's published by Liberty Library, 300 Independence Avenue, Southeast, Washington, D.C., 20003. Now, it may be filled with propaganda. Some of it may be true, some may not be true. It's hard to judge these things. But there are very few books out on the Iran-Iraq War, so I just wanted to mention that to you. There were witnesses this past week, John Singlaub and John Garwood, William O'Boyle, and Joseph Coors. And while they were testifying, it was the forum to tell you about democracy, the wonders of the Contras, the miracle they were doing, getting rid of the horrible Sandinistas where they have no freedom of the press. And in the process of their telling you these stories, they told you how they got assistance from the great democracies of the world, such as Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, South Korea, and Brunei, that have no LaPenca, have no free press, that have death squads, that have terrible standards of living, where there's the very rich and very poor that are constantly in turmoil, that are not representative of the people. So who do they go to for money? America, the democracy, for the freedom fighters who are removing jaws and teeth and burning Americans so we won't know what's happening at home. They go to the dictatorships of Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, South Korea, Brunei, and those are the epitome of democracies. And as I mentioned before, they also use the Argentine military junta for assistance. And now John Singlaub is in Laos, and he wanted to send the Laotian tribesmen, the heroin poppy-growing tribesmen, over here to assist the Contras, and he's working over in Laos at this time. Also, John Singlaub is involved on the island of Pelú, and I want to link the island of Pelú, share it with you. There was an article in Nation magazine written by Christopher Hitchens, May the 9th, on New Zealand and the problems in the Pacific, and the island of Pelú, which is a protector of the United States, wants a nuclear-free constitution. they've been trying to have. And of course, what happens in a country in 1985, someone went to all the trouble of murdering Palu's president, Haruo, H-R-U-O, Remelik. In the first use of a handgun on the island that bans firearms, in 7 years it was banned, and he was killed. And Palu is the fallback base in the event of a U.S. withdrawal from the Philippines. Now, along those lines, and I do want to share Oliver North's offices, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the money he gave to the Pacific Democratic Union that goes into New Zealand to the right wing there, and it is under the control of General John Singlaub and the World Anti-Communist League. And along those lines, a listener to World Watchers from Santa Cruz sent me a lot of information on Palu and the problems there in trying to keep it a nuclear-free country, and it goes into John Singlaub's role there and the repression. I'll give you the address where you can write to these people. It's called Worldwide Nuclear Sovereignty Campaign, Palu Support Action Alert. And again, this has to do with John Singlaub, Oliver North, the World Anti-Communist League. Write to P.O. Box 1057, Bolinas, B-O-L-I-N-A-S, California, 94924, and ask for information on this area. I'm particularly interested, after I saw that movie Half-Life, of the experimentations of the hydrogen bombs in the Marshall Islands and the consequences of that. I have felt very deeply about studying more about these islands. The president ordered, their newsletter came out recently that said the president announced that Palu's power and light would be cut off nightly until a 8th election is held and the nuclear ban is revoked. The people want a nuclear-free zone, and since they wanted that, the electricity and water is cut off every night, and they can't have it. Now, this is a long newsletter. Again, I'll get into more of it later, and it tells about the red baiting of the Constitution and the support of John Whitehall in Australia by the Christian World Anti-Communist League, and he's part of the Anti-Communist Crusader, and he's trying to take care of the newspapers to publish an independent newspaper in Palu. And he works with John Singlaub, an ex-CIA agent implicated in the Iran-Contra affair. And the statistics on the Marshall Islands and on the treatment of Palu and the hazardous waste and what is happening in Fiji, that island is mentioned here. And, of course, they just had a coup recently. I'll share this material with you very soon. And, as I say, it goes into the links of John Singlaub now in the Philippines with Mr. Enrile, getting ready to overthrow that country and put it in the hands of the narcotics traffic, not the freedom fighters, but the same people that were behind the Marcos administration. And Singlaub is over in the Philippines and in Laos and in Palu. While he's a defendant in the Christic Institute suit, he is Mr. Big, floating around these various islands now and making trouble in the Pacific region. That's his home base from his service in Southeast Asia and in Korea. He's the right person to be doing it for the wrong reasons. They have selected their right person, and to see John Singlaub testify and be treated with such respect by the entire team of the Democrats and Republicans and attorneys of the Iran-Contra affair, you could really puke. I hope your television isn't so close that you smear it on the screen as you watch some of these people and the fawning of the alleged investigators over these marvelous freedom fighters who've done nothing but kill and deal in drugs since World War II. Another publication I want you to order, I can't put it all on the air right now, from the Resource Center. I gave that address once before, Box 4506, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87196. They have a long article, 4 pages, on covert operations in Central America. And this goes into the AFFL, the CIO, Project Democracy, the National Endowment for Democracy, Oliver North's groups, and how it lingers and mingles with the National Security Council and the hanky-pank that they've been pulling in Central America for many, many years since World War II. They also have booklets, and I mentioned the Iran-Iraq book. They sell booklets at that address, $5 each, that explain some of the things that are happening, and it's very important that you get the other side of this story, particularly since the entire investigation is praising the Central American freedom fighters, and not one Democrat has gotten up to explain why the Boland Amendment was passed in the first place. You can send for booklets on El Salvador, the other war, the new right humanitarians, in quotes, the new battlefield in Central America, Guatemala, the politics of counterinsurgency, Ailfield, that's the American Institute for Free Labor and Development, founded by J. Peter Grace, their role in Chile, destabilization of Nicaragua, a rain of dollars, U.S. economic intervention in Central America, focused on the Eastern Caribbean, bananas, bucks, and books, transnational corporations in the Caribbean, I did the destabilization. So there's approximately 10 books. There's another book, The Other Side of Paradise, Foreign Control of the Caribbean, and a Central American fact book. I'm going to order all of them, and I think a person should at least get one and be knowledgeable about what is going on and how we are pleading ignorance and allowing our country and the members of Congress to pass the money needed to keep these situations perpetuating themselves. Now, last week when I came into the radio station for World Watchers, Ronald Reagan's little tip into the Persian Gulf was just beginning. And on program number 806 last week, I just had a few comments. Ronald Reagan's Gulf of Tonkin, the diversionary in the Persian Gulf. It's a great media diversionary. The U.S. Navy ship was struck by Iraq missile. No more Gary Hart to kick around. We had 2 weeks of Hart. And on Monday, the third week of the hearings, where very important testimony would be taken. And, of course, this past week, John Singlaub, and then there was General Secord. The hearings were blocked out, and the importance of the region strategically, the United States became the emphasis, as if to say this is why we were dealing there in the first place. The Washington Post had a very interesting story about Iran, Iraq, February the 20th, titled, North Gave Prohibited Data to the Iranians. NSC computer messages describe information sharing. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North gave Iran top-secret information. President Reagan authorized limited sharing of intelligence with Iran when he approved of arms sales to Iran, but two sources say the evidence in the computer messages discloses that North passed data from secret and top intelligence designated no foreign, meaning no foreign national. It is unclear precisely what type of intelligence North provided, although one knowledgeable said this information would have aided Iran in the 7-year war with Iraq. Ollie was running his own covert operation within the authorized covert operation. And I bring this up again because I believe that Ronald Reagan was indebted to the Iranians for releasing the hostages at the time of the first election in 1980, holding them back till Jimmy Carter lost the election. And he's been blackmailed ever since to send information to Iran, even though he's tilting in favor of Iraq. He was obligated, so Ollie North had to be doing the paying and the messages, just as Secord helped to assist Iran after Iran was in the hands of Khomeini, and they, in quotes, were doing it on their own. This says he ran his own covert within the authorized covert operation, adding that it wasn't clear to investigators whether North had the approval from his boss, Admiral Poindexter. The CIA and U.S. intelligence agencies, others, they don't say the Department of Defense, are reluctant to share classified information abroad unless an exchange was worked out with a foreign intelligence service and the exchanges are monitored and controlled. It could not be learned when North passed this on to Iran. He did it under the table. The computer messages disclosed his actions, and they were turned over to Senator Tower, of course, who did nothing with them. A senior official said yesterday that North's freelance intelligence sharing designed to win the release of American hostages being held in Lebanon, and this was to win the congressional votes, of course, for 1986, and he wanted to build credibility with Iranians, may turn out to be a nightmare, demonstrating the administration was operating at cross purposes. Reagan had formally authorized the covert sharing of intelligence with Iraq, including information from sensitive U.S. satellite reconnaissance. So Reagan had formally authorized covert operations with Iraq, and Ollie North, to get the hostages home for the election, was offering the same papers to Iran, hoping that Reagan would have a full sweep of emotion as he brought home the hostages before the last congressional election. The article said a key legal question raised by the message is whether North believed he had authorization from his superiors to pass the intelligence to Iran. If he were acting on his own, he may have violated espionage laws for military personnel. They can be convicted and even carry the death penalty. I don't believe that will happen. However, if North was given authorization, he may not have violated the law. The Senate committee has spent weeks investigating whether or not North was pressing senior officials to show samples of U.S. intelligence to Iranian contacts. The intelligence he provided Iran was separate from the samples he obtained from the CIA. The Senate report said that Robert Gates, who was deputy CIA director at that time, objected to the release of the information to Iran. Gates testified that he objected to the release of specific intelligence relating to Iraq, but he was overruled by the National Security Council, and the CIA was directed to prepare intelligence materials. The report said a CIA official was directed to take the intelligence sample to Manikir Ghorbanifar, the Iranian middleman. CIA and Ghorbanifar distrusted each other. He didn't pass lie detector tests, but North and Ghorbanifar had a close working relationship, which would explain, trying to get those hostages out for the election, and that he trusted them. And in addition to the secret authorized sharing of intelligence with Iran and Iraq, the revelation of North's unauthorized intelligence to Iran would mean that the administration was using 3 channels of secret data to participate in a war that the United States was officially neutral. Last August, the CIA had established a top-secret Washington-Baghdad link to ensure that the Iraqis received higher quality and more timely satellite intelligence, the sources have said. And if they got all that, it would explain why Iraq was allowed and told for this missile to hit the American ship, which the Iranians said was to create our presence in the Persian Gulf. And it came just the Monday of the 3rd week of the hearings. The article says the second route was William Casey took a personal hand in developing intelligence sharing with Iraq, and met at least twice in the fall with senior Iraq officials to make certified they were satisfied with the channel and to encourage them to make more lethal attacks on Iranian installations. This is the double dealing of our teams to give the most secret material to Iraq and also then give some to Iran to get the hostages. And remember, this Iranian team were there to get a new government in Iran, to plan the murder of Ayatollah Khomeini, and to take over Iran because of its strategic importance against the Soviet Union and so forth. Now, concluding this article, it says, at the time the secret intelligence sharing with Iraq was publicly disclosed in December, at the time of the Iran-Contra affair breaking open, because then it looked like we were arming Iran and not favoring Iraq. So it broke open that we were sharing vital information with Iraq. A well-placed government official said that the policy of helping Iran and Iraq was a cynical attempt to engineer a stalemate in the war. The cynical part is that we were sending arms to Iran so that we get the hostages out before the election so Reagan could get a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And if he did, and he was right, it was important, there wouldn't be anything like the Iran Contra investigations at this time. If it was all Republican, they keep saying on television that hearings are boring, nothing is accomplished. Robert Novak keeps using the word boring, just repetitious, and the Sunday talk shows and Agronsky and McLaughlin reports and all those junk shows miss the whole point because they're defending the system. But the matter was that they wanted the arms to Iran. They wanted to get a Senate and a House that were Republican, and the cynical other part was to control the Persian Gulf by helping Iraq, which may strategically be right, but we're certainly going about it in crazy ways. Now, I've taken the headlines of a lot of pertinent articles from this past week because I began by saying that the Iran-Iraq conflict was a Gulf of Tonkin meeting, an agent provocateur excuse to stay in the Persian Gulf, and not only strategically to be there, we have 7 major ships there, but it takes all the news off of the Iran-Contra hearings. And there's one important point, is that Ronald Reagan, not only when he talks about Iran, quotes John Kennedy, but he has a Franklin Roosevelt complex. And I've mentioned this before in the year. I can see us in World War III, in a war. I can see his grabbing the war policy decisions. I can see his not getting out of the White House with all these investigations coming down and all the disgrace that he'll have to sit and listen to when he's in 666 St. Cloud Road in Bel Air, California. He'd much rather be here with all the sugar coating that he gets and the flags waving and the music, and I could see him wanting to be commander-in-chief at wartime, like Franklin Roosevelt. And so there are several reasons for his doing the things he's doing. It's a great diversionary, and it plays into the minds of Jerry Falwell and the very devout Christians around him who've had the Armageddon complex for years. And I've done many broadcasts on that, the idea that the Third World War against the Christian, the Antichrist, Russia, the Marxist-Leninists, the Antichrist, would be defeated and the war would start in the Persian Gulf. So we have a diversionary, we have a religious motive, but the diversionary is great, as I say, starting the day of the third week. Now, here are some of the headlines, given that state of mind that I have. One, New York Times, May the 14th, and there were many articles. I'm just taking one of each different topic, and not all of them, and also Mother Jones, April 1987. Iraq chemical war cited by the United Nations. Iraq has stepped up its chemical weapons against Iran. They never denied using chemical weapons, nerve gas, and these articles say even Adolf Hitler didn't use these gases, and they're using them. San Francisco Examiner, U.S. reflagging of Kuwaiti tankers, unwarranted, risky purpose to limit USSR influence in the region. That's the headline. Unwarranted, risky purpose to limit the Soviet influence. All this being done because Iraq hit an American ship. Iraqi jets, similar to the ones that attacked the same area, were given a warning, several warnings. The LA Times said May 21st, the planes were within 20 miles of the destroyer, and there was time to tell them about warnings of what they were going after or who was there. Face the Nation, Casper Weinberger was saying this past Sunday. The motive for being there is to keep the Soviet Union from having access to the seas, to the ocean, and it reminded me of a television series going on at the present time about Edward VII and Queen Victoria. There was no communism or Marxism, but the fear of the two small islands, Japan and Great Britain, was that the Russia in those days and Soviet Union today would interfere with the monopoly and the island hopping of Japan and Great Britain. And Casper Weinberger said on Face the Nation, even if there were no Marxism, it's strategically important. It's not a question of communists, it's geography. I'm just translating what he said, but those were the thoughts he had. An editorial in the LA Times, May 21st, a dubious explanation. U.S. officials are responsible for the Stark attack. Why are we aiding Iraq? Iraq is equal threat to the United States as Iran is. Who determined the Stark should not ever be alert to attack, as well as, say, attacking Iran? Who determined this? The editorial said. And then another large article in the LA Times, no time to fire, the U.S. skipper says. This is May 21st. He didn't have time to fire, and the other account was they watched this airplane for 2 hours and warned them. Plan to aid Kuwait ships draws fire, and you've all seen that. Representative Tom Lantos, the one who said, Ollie, you're such a wonderful hero. Well, to cover Ollie the hero, he's getting his good diversionary. Lantos says this surely means we become a party to the Iran-Iraq war in the Middle East, and he's aware that this could trigger World War III. Another article, other powers hold the Gulf War talks, and this was before all of this, May the 14th. 5 UN Security Council members met 1 week before the Iraq missile hit the American plane. They were seeking troop withdrawal, a ceasefire in the Middle East, and just 1 week before Reagan allowed this to happen. Washington Post, May 14th. Iran denounces the U.S. Soviet aid to Kuwait. Moscow said the growing support for Iraq and the superpowers is depriving Iran of an option that they might have to retaliate. 28 ships have been attacked recently. New York Times, February 28th, 1987. This was a while back. A Solomon Schwartz was arrested. He's an arms dealer who works with Oliver North. Frank Turple, his name has been mentioned, is working with the National Security Council with the gentleman arrested in Brazil for about to invade Ghana to take that over. He was arrested, early arrested in February this year, for sending weapons to Iraq. Other countries he was sending them to were the Soviet Union, Poland, and Argentina. Argentina is where the weapons were supplied to the CIA mercenaries recruited by Robert Brown, the co-partner of Robert Owen and John Singlaub, and Solomon Schwartz was sending weapons to Iraq. San Francisco Chronicle, March 3rd. Iraq diplomat tells of meeting with Oliver North. Now this, March 6th rather. Now this is just 2 months ago that the Iraq diplomat was meeting with North, the Iraq ambassador to UN. The story accounted for was 2 weeks ago. The meeting was last year in 1986. Ambassador Nizar Hamdoun was in the White House, and he was discussing the Iraqi military situation, meeting with Oliver North and President Reagan in the White House last year. Another story, Iran warns the United States not to increase its presence in the Persian Gulf. Hussein Sheikh Kholassam said Iraq deliberately attacked the STARK to increase involvement of the U.S., the Western nations. And he's the Deputy Foreign Minister for Political Affairs. And, of course, that's what I call the Gulf of Tonkin syndrome, that Iraq deliberately was allowed to attack. Another story, Reagan defends his role in the Persian Gulf. He said to retreat and withdraw would only repeat the improvidence, the mistakes of the past, and the final victory to those who seek war, who make war. I mean, such double talk. Thomas Buchanan must be back reading his speeches that to withdraw would give a victory to people who want war. San Francisco Chronicle, White House was rebuking Richard Murphy, the Secretary of State, the State Department chief Middle East expert. He said that flying our U.S. flag in the Persian Gulf could bring about a war. Now, Reagan doesn't want warnings that this could bring a war, because then you have to be told he was warned in advance. So he's furious at Mr. Murphy. Many of you saw or read how angry he was to even mention that. Monday, the day of the attack, was May the 18th. As I say, that was the third week of the Contra investigations beginning, and that was the day of the attack. Wall Street Journal has had the best articles on the Iran-Iraq war. May 19th, they said Iraq warplanes attack came after 2 warnings from the U.S. ship that they had been tracking the aircraft for more than 1 hour. May 19th, there was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal separate from that. The Navy had ample warning an Iraqi aircraft was headed towards the U.S. frigate. Radar tracked the plane from takeoff 2 hours earlier. Admiral Vice Henry Mustig said the Stark had enough time to launch countermeasures. Officials from the State Department and the Pentagon responded charitably to the Iraq attack on the Stark. They used such terms as inadvertent or no indication of deliberate hostile intent and a mistaken attack. This was a continuance of a dubious policy of winking at Iraq's misdeeds in hope of rapprochement. The State Department in 1982 took Iraq off the list of international terrorist countries, even though they were long identified with terrorism. Iraq had been the headquarters of Abu Nidal, the terrorist group, until it moved to Syria and Libya. And last year, the PLO moved its military command to Baghdad. The Hussein regime has an extensive history of crimes against domestic political foes. It has broken international laws by using poison gas. We are dealing here in a duplicitous Middle East, but it stretches credibility to imagine the highly trained pilot of an advanced fighter purposely flew down the Persian Gulf, locked his radar on a U.S. frigate, and fired a missile by inadvertence. The Pentagon and the State Department might profit from being less quick in granting forgiveness and more vigorous in demanding to know why the Stark was attacked and why it wasn't ready. That is the Wall Street Journal. They also had another long article, May the 21st. The Reagan administration is plunging even deeper into the troubled waters of the Middle East. The Iraq attack is producing a more pronounced U.S. tilt toward Iraq in the Gulf War. In Lebanon, Mr. Reagan is upping the ante despite divisions within his own administration and between the White House and Congress. He's using military force to solve political problems. And again, he's using that because this is a diversionary that doesn't make sense to anybody until they start addressing themselves to the fact of what he has to cover up and how important it is to use the military, not sit and have dialogue, but quick action that draws attention from what he's covering up. The Wall Street Journal said both the civilian leadership of the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff are wary of diverting American force from their primary mission of confronting the Soviets. They don't like to be diverted from that, especially into conflicts which escalate suddenly and unpredictably. In Congress, loyal Republicans are wary of writing a blank check to keep the Persian Gulf open, especially when 7% of the oil gets to the United States through the Strait of Hormuz, compared with 70% of Japan, and also the European allies get about 50%. Are we becoming a silent partner to the Iran-Iraq war, said Representative Lantos, and I gave you that quotation before. Lawmakers are worrying that the president is skirting the War Powers Act by sending the Navy into a combat zone without the consent of Congress. The abrupt withdrawal of the Marines from Lebanon, the administration's inability to deliver a token military aid to Jordan and Saudi Arabia, the secret attempts to ransom American hostages in Lebanon by selling arms to Iran and paying off Lebanese terrorists have undermined America's already limited credibility in the Arab world. And there are many more articles I wanted to share with you on the Iran-Iraq war, but time is running out. Maybe I'll do more next week on that, because this is something that Reagan has quickly jumped into. It has taken the attention of all the news, the talk shows, and of course he and Nancy are great at funerals. They've buried 300 Americans at this time now, including the hijackers, the peacekeeping force from the Middle East, the Lebanon marine disaster, the grenade invasion, the Challenger explosion, and they get a lot of hugs and kisses from the family, who are forever grateful. But this is a situation brought on at a particular time for no reason at all, except that it serves the purposes of this administration to keep us into that battle scene, so that what they're doing with the Contras and with other countries around the world will not be so noticeable. This is Mae Brussell. I'll be back to update more of these and other scandalous news with you next week. In the meantime, take care and keep reading those papers and watch the television hearings if you possibly can.